After the fall of Nazi Germany in 1945, silence became the most common language among survivors. In homes rebuilt from rubble and lives reassembled from loss, countless men and women who had witnessed the Holocaust chose not to speak. The weight of memory was too heavy, the fear of disbelief too great. Among them was Józef Walaszczyk, a Polish man whose extraordinary acts of courage remained unknown for nearly 4 decades. His story, and those of others who emerged from the shadows of Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and countless other camps, reveal the complex relationship between trauma, silence, and the eventual need to testify. For 37 years, Józef Walaszczyk told no one what he had done in 1942. Not his wife, not his children. He had lived through the Nazi occupation of Poland, bribed Gestapo officers, forged documents, and hidden 50 Jews in apartments he controlled. After the war, he simply buried the memories beneath layers of normalcy. It was not until the early 1980s, sitting before a young historian in Warsaw, that the truth began to surface. Born in 1919 in Częstochowa, Walaszczyk was a quiet, intelligent man who adapted quickly to survival under occupation. When the Germans invaded Poland, he was 20 years old and working as a leather worker. The chaos of occupation brought opportunity for those with courage and cunning. Józef was soon placed in charge of managing a grain estate under German supervision, a position that provided mobility and access to official documents, tools that later became the foundation of his underground network of rescue. In 1941, a single moment defined the course of his life. He was staying at a Warsaw hotel with his girlfriend, Irina Front, who was Jewish and living under false papers. One morning, Gestapo officers burst through the corridors, conducting surprise searches. If they discovered Irina's identity, both would be executed on the spot. Józef acted instantly. He intercepted the officers, offered his room for inspection, joked with them in fluent German, and distracted them just long enough for Irina to escape. Later, he bribed officials with gold and vodka to erase traces of her identity and forged new papers for her and others. As the Nazi occupation intensified, Józef began hiding Jews in safe apartments, some housing more than a dozen at a time. He supplied food, documents, and money, using every connection he could find to keep them alive. On one occasion, a betrayal nearly led to his execution. Arrested and lined up before a firing squad, he managed to talk his way out, again using his German fluency and composure. Instead of retreating into safety, he continued his work. After the war, Poland's political climate made silence the only safe choice. Under Soviet rule, those who had aided Jews risked suspicion, interrogation, or worse. Józef returned to ordinary life, running a business and raising a family. To his neighbors, he was a quiet man with a steady routine. To the people he had saved, he was a ghost who had vanished. It was not until the 1980s that survivors began reaching out. Letters arrived from Israel, France, and the United States, grateful voices that broke through the silence. In 2002, Yad Vashem recognized him as one of the righteous among the nations. At the ceremony, he spoke softly and sparingly, as if each word carried the risk of exposure. His story opened the door for others who had hidden their pasts in similar silence. Eva Schloss was one of those voices. Born in Vienna in 1929, she fled with her family to Amsterdam after the Nazi annexation of Austria. There, she became friends with Anne Frank, unaware that their fates would soon intertwine. When the Nazis invaded the Netherlands, the Geiringer family went into hiding, but were captured in 1944 and deported to Auschwitz. Eva was 15. Her father and brother were killed. She and her mother survived. After the war, they returned to Amsterdam and discovered that Otto Frank, Anne's father, had also survived. Otto later married Eva's mother, making Eva the stepsister of the world's most famous diarist. But, unlike Anne's words, Eva's memories remained unspoken. She focused on building a life in London, raising her children, and avoiding the past. It took her nearly 40 years to speak publicly. In the 1980s, she began visiting schools to tell her story, transforming grief into education. In 2019, she reclaimed her Austrian citizenship, symbolically restoring a part of what had been stolen from her as a child. "They took everything," she said, "but not my voice." For other survivors, it was not people but objects that broke their silence. Irene Fogel Weiss, born in 1930 in what is now Ukraine, discovered a photograph in the archives of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum that forced her to confront her past. The image showed a young girl standing among new arrivals at Auschwitz, her own face staring back after 8 decades. That photograph had been taken by Nazi officials as part of the camp's records. Weiss had spent her imprisonment sorting through the belongings of the murdered, her childhood consumed by the task of cataloging death. For decades, she built a quiet life in America, teaching and raising a family, never discussing her past. When she finally faced that photograph, she began speaking publicly, transforming a document of dehumanization into a tool for remembrance. Memory returned in other, unexpected ways. Roman Kent, born in Łódź in 1929, had carried a different kind of promise. When he was a child in the ghetto, German soldiers took away his dog, Lala. In that moment, he swore that if he survived, he would tell the world what happened to her. The vow stayed with him through Auschwitz, Flossenbürg, and the death marches that followed. After the war, he rebuilt his life in the United States, raising a family in silence. It was only when his daughter asked about their missing relatives that he began to speak, fulfilling the promise made to his dog, and to all who had perished. His children's book, My Dog Lala, and his later work with Holocaust education ensured that even the smallest fragment of love lost in the camps was not forgotten. For Bronya Brandman, silence took a physical form. A tattoo, number 52643, inked into her forearm at Auschwitz, remained hidden for half a century beneath long sleeves. Born in 1939 in Jaworzno, Poland, Bronya was deported to Auschwitz at 14. Her family was murdered on arrival. She survived by following her older sister's warnings to remain invisible. After the war, she emigrated to New York, married, and raised children without ever revealing her past. It was not until the 1990s, while volunteering at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, that a colleague noticed the faint number on her arm. Gently encouraged to tell her story, Bronya began to speak publicly for the first time. What had once been a mark of dehumanization became a symbol of survival and testimony. Some, like Naftali First, resisted the idea of ever returning to the places that had nearly destroyed them. Born in 1932 in Bratislava, he was deported to Auschwitz and later Buchenwald as a child. He and his brother were among the youngest prisoners, protected by older inmates who risked their lives to keep them alive. After liberation, First settled in Israel, becoming an engineer and raising a family. For decades, he refused interviews or memorial visits. Then, in the 1990s, he returned to Buchenwald for a commemoration ceremony. Kneeling before a stone engraved with the names of the dead, he finally allowed himself to remember aloud. His later years were devoted to education and remembrance, ensuring that the stories of those children who did not survive would not fade into silence. Denise Holstein's silence was different. It was written, not spoken. In 1945, at just 18, she returned to Paris after surviving Auschwitz. Overwhelmed by the need to preserve her memories, she wrote them down in a notebook, tied it with string, and hid it in a drawer. There, it stayed for nearly half a century. Born in 1927 in Rouen, France, Denise had been deported with her parents in 1944. They were murdered on arrival. After the war, she became a teacher and lived quietly, her story confined to the hidden pages. It was only in the 1990s, after being encouraged by French historian Serge Klarsfeld, that she published her memoir, Je ne suis pas une héroïne. The work became a cornerstone of Holocaust education in France, showing how even the ordinary could endure the extraordinary. For some survivors, the catalyst was not paper or photographs, but the rediscovery of a personal artifact. In 2005, archaeologists excavating a concentration camp unearthed a corroded bracelet engraved with the name Benek Feiner. Its owner, known later as Ben Feiner, had survived 6 Nazi camps, but had never spoken of them. Born in 1927 in Bytom, Poland, he was 12 when the Nazis deported him. The bracelet had been his only possession throughout years of forced labor, starvation, and brutality. After liberation, he rebuilt his life in the United States and lived quietly for 60 years. When the bracelet resurfaced, it became the key that unlocked his memories. Ben began to give public talks, wrote his memoir, Silent for 60 Years. and transformed a forgotten piece of metal into a beacon of remembrance. Technology brought yet another transformation. In 2020, during the global pandemic, 96-year-old Lily Ebert turned to TikTok with the help of her great-grandson, Dov Foreman. Her short videos, beginning with the words, "My name is Lily Ebert. I survived Auschwitz," reached millions. Born in 1923 in Hungary, Lily lost her mother and siblings upon arrival at Auschwitz. For decades, she lived quietly in London, reluctant to recount her past. When she finally did, her message transcended generations. Through screens and social media, she reached young audiences who had never met a survivor in person. Her voice became a bridge between history and the digital age, proof that remembrance could adapt to the language of the present. Pola Suswein's journey back into memory was perhaps the most literal. Born in Krakow in 1930, she was deported to Auschwitz as a child and lost most of her family there. For 50 years, she avoided discussing her experiences. In 1998, she was invited to join the March of the Living, a pilgrimage that brings students to former camps in Poland. Cameras followed her return for the documentary, Pola's March. Standing before the gates of Auschwitz, she finally spoke of the fear, the hunger, and the faces that had haunted her for decades. Her trembling voice transformed private grief into collective witness, teaching a new generation what silence had hidden. Each of these stories reveals that silence after atrocity is not emptiness, but a kind of survival. To remain silent was to protect oneself, to build a life in a world that did not want to hear. Yet, as the years passed and time began to erase witnesses, silence itself became dangerous. When these survivors finally spoke, they did so not for catharsis, but for duty, to ensure that memory outlasted denial and that the past could still warn the living. The lessons they carried are stark. Nazism ended in 1945, but its echoes continue in the form of intolerance, authoritarianism, and indifference. Each testimony, whether delivered from a podium, discovered in a drawer, or spoken into a smartphone, serves as both history and warning. Silence can protect the living, but truth protects the future. Their voices may now be gone, but their words remain, urging us to remember, to speak, and to stand against the return of hate. The burden of witness has passed from those who lived through the camps to those who learn from them. The responsibility is now ours, to listen, to tell, and to ensure that history's darkest chapter is never written again.